At my wedding reception, I was fixing my veil in the reflection of a copper backsplash I had spent 3 months restoring by hand. The metal had been buffed until it shone like glass, smooth enough to betray anything happening behind me. That polished surface is the only reason I noticed her. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was standing directly at my back. She wasn't looking for my eyes in the copper. Her focus was fixed on my champagne glass resting on the bar. I watched as she reached into her clutch and removed a tiny glass vial. I saw 3 transparent drops fall into my drink. I didn't turn around. I didn't gasp. I waited until she drifted away to greet a senator's wife. Then, with the calm precision of a surgeon, I reached forward and switched our glasses. The poison now rested in her hand, and the true wedding drama had officially begun. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Most brides would have been locked in a bathroom, breathing into paper towels after watching their new mother-in-law attempt to drug them. But I'm a restoration architect. I make my living diagnosing failing structures and stabilizing ruins before they give way. Panic is a luxury I don't get to indulge in. What settled into my chest wasn't fear. It was static load, the engineering term for the crushing, silent weight a beam carries in the moment before it either holds firm or snaps apart. I walked back to the head table, my heels striking the hardwood in an even, deliberate rhythm. I checked my pulse, 80 beats per minute elevated but contained. I smoothed the silk of my gown and sat beside Ethan, a pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives every day, yet somehow couldn't recognize that his own mother was a pathogen. He squeezed my hand beneath the table, his thumb brushing my ring. He looked at me with so much love it nearly hurt. He whispered that I looked beautiful. He had no idea that 10 feet away, his mother was calmly sipping champagne she intended to be my undoing. I looked across the table. Eleanor was seated now, holding court with my parents, laughing at something my father said, perfectly inhabiting the role of gracious matriarch. Then she met my gaze. Her eyes were cold, lifeless things buried beneath layers of expensive mascara. She lifted her glass, my glass, in a silent toast. Her lips curved into a smug little smile that said, "Checkmate, darling." She believed she had designed this moment. She believed I was just a fortunate girl who'd wandered into her dynasty, a loose end to be handled with a checkbook or a vial of chemicals. I lifted my water glass, my hand was steady. I took a slow, intentional sip. The water was cold, it tasted like clarity. I watched Eleanor take another drink of the champagne. She was utterly confident in her cruelty. For 2 years, she'd been trying to bulldoze me, treating me like an illegal occupant in her son's life. She called my work dirty. She offered me 6 figures to vanish. What she forgot was this: restoration architects know exactly where the weaknesses are, and we know precisely when a structure is on the verge of collapse. I set my glass down, I smiled back at her, and I waited. To understand why I didn't stop her, why I didn't seize her wrist and call for the police immediately, you have to understand the architecture of our war. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was the demolition phase of a project Eleanor had been managing for 2 years. From the moment Ethan introduced us, I was a zoning violation in her meticulously curated world. The Sterlings are what people refer to as old money, which usually just means their wealth is dusty and they're deeply uncomfortable with anyone who earns a living through actual work. I first met Eleanor during an estate inspection. I was wearing work boots and a hard hat streaked with drywall dust. She examined my hands like they carried a disease. She asked Ethan right in front of me if he'd hired the help for renovations. When he told her I was his girlfriend, she didn't smile. She simply said, "Oh," the insults were never overt. They were structural, tiny fractures designed to weaken me over time. She'd forget to include me in family dinners. She'd introduce me to friends as Ethan's little project manager, conveniently ignoring my master's degree and professional license. But the true failure happened 6 months ago. I was seated in her library when she slid a thick cream envelope across the mahogany desk. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000. She called it a severance package. She said, "You're a lovely girl, Olivia, but let's be realistic. Your new money, you build things, we own things. You'll never be comfortable at this table, and I'm only trying to spare you the embarrassment of pretending otherwise." I studied the check. It was more than my parents made in 2 years. Then I looked at her. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it back at her. I slid it across the desk and said, "You're underestimating the cost of labor, Eleanor. "I'm not for sale." That was the moment her eyes changed. That was when I stopped being an inconvenience and became a threat, and threats must be neutralized. In psychology, there's a concept called an extinction burst. I learned about it while studying how stress affects building materials, but it applies perfectly to narcissists. When a toddler realizes screaming no longer works, they don't stop. They escalate, they shriek louder, they flail, they destroy. Behavior spikes to a frantic peak just before it finally collapses. The week before the wedding was Alina's extinction burst. The bribes failed, the insults failed, the wedding was inevitable, so she went scorched earth. On Tuesday, she called our florist and tried to cancel everything, claiming the bride had died in a car accident. Thankfully, the florist called me first. On Thursday, I found Alina in the bridal suite inspecting my veil. After she left, a jagged tear ran straight through the lace. She claimed it snagged on her ring, but I know the tensile strength of French lace. It doesn't tear unless someone wants it to. I repaired the veil with gold thread, a restoration technique. I didn't tell Ethan. I knew she'd twist the story, gaslight him, call me paranoid, say I was stressed and imagining things. She relied on the sheer absurdity of her behavior to protect her, on the assumption that no rational person would believe it. So when I saw the vial at the reception, everything snapped into focus. This wasn't random, this wasn't simple hatred. This was the final detonation of her extinction burst. She couldn't stop the wedding, so she chose to poison the memory. She wanted me ill. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted to prove to every high society guest in that room that I was weak, unstable, and unworthy of the sterling name. She wanted a spectacle. I decided to let her be the casualty of it. Structural failure is rarely instant. Before a building collapses, it complains. Bolts snap, beams groan, you just have to be quiet enough to listen. The reception hall thundered with applause as Ethan finished his speech. He was charming, self-effacing, flawless. He sat down and kissed my cheek, whispering that he was the luckiest man alive. Then the room fell silent. A spoon tapped against crystal, ringing like a warning bell. Alina rose to her feet. She looked regal in her silver gown. She lifted the champagne flute, the one with the gold rim, the one she had poisoned, high into the air. The room waited. She smiled at the guests, then turned her gaze to me. It was a predator's smile. "Marriage," she began, her voice smooth with that practiced finishing school cadence, "is about partnership. It's about knowing who you are and where you come from." A few women at table 4 chuckled. "And most importantly, it's about trust, believing the person beside you has your best interests at heart." She locked eyes with me on the word trust. I didn't blink. I raised my water glass. Alina raised the poisoned chalice. "To the happy couple," she said. She tipped the glass back. I watched the golden liquid vanish. I watched her swallow. One gulp, two. She emptied it. For a moment, nothing happened. She sat down, looking triumphant. She turned to my father and began discussing his golf handicap. 1 minute passed, then another. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, counting seconds like a metronome. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, the groaning began. Eleanor stopped mid-sentence. She blinked rapidly, her hand flying to her throat. Her face, normally sealed beneath layers of foundation and control, drained to a sickly gray. She tried to stand, perhaps to excuse herself, but gravity intervened. Her knees gave way. She grabbed the tablecloth for balance, dragging a centerpiece of expensive lilies down with her. Then the medicine did exactly what chemistry demands. It wasn't delicate, it was violent. Eleanor released a guttural animal sound that silenced the string quartet. She vomited across the head table, over the silk runner, the china, and the skirt of her custom gown. The smell hit instantly. The woman who had spent 60 years cultivating an image of untouchable perfection was now retching on the floor in front of 200 members of the city's elite. "Mom," Ethan shouted, leaping to his feet. She looked up at him, eyes wide and unfocused, gasping for air. "I don't," she slurred. "I don't feel." She collapsed sideways into the mess she had made. The room erupted into chaos, but I stayed seated for 1 second longer, watching the ruin. It was ugly, it was tragic, and it was exactly what she had ordered for me. In a crisis, most people panic. As the guests screamed and crowded around, I stood up and took charge. I told the DJ to cut the music. I directed the coordinator to clear a path for the paramedics. Ethan was on the floor with her, checking her vitals, his surgeon training kicking in. He was shouting commands. Pulse threat, airways clear, pupils dilated. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes. They loaded Alina onto the stretcher. She was barely conscious, moaning something incoherent. As they lifted her, her beaded clutch bag, which had been resting on her lap, slid off and hit the floor. The clasp snapped open. Contents spilled across the hardwood: a lipstick, a compact mirror, and a small empty glass vial. Ethan saw it. He froze, but that wasn't the smoking gun. Next to the vial was a piece of heavy cream-colored stationery folded into a square. I reached down and picked it up. I knew what it was before I opened it. It was in Alina's handwriting. Elegant looping script. I walked over to Ethan. He was staring at the vial, his face pale. "Ethan," I said. My voice was low, cutting through the noise. "Read this." He looked at me confused, then took the paper. I watched his eyes scan the words. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize for the interruption. My new daughter-in-law has struggled for years with personal demons. We hoped the stress of the wedding wouldn't trigger a relapse, but it seems the alcohol was too much. Please forgive the mess. We will get her the help she needs." It was a speech she had written before the reception. She hadn't just planned to make me sick, she had planned the narrative of my destruction. She was going to frame my poisoning as a drunken, bulimic breakdown. She was going to take the microphone while I was vomiting and destroy my reputation forever. I saw the change happen in Ethan's face. It is a rare thing to watch a man become an orphan while his mother is still alive. The concern vanished, the panic vanished, his eyes went cold. He looked at the note, then at the vial, then at the woman on the stretcher. He finally saw the architecture of the trap. He realized that the monster wasn't under the bed. She was the one who had tucked him in. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. He didn't look at me. He looked at the paramedic. "She didn't have a stroke," Ethan said. His voice sounded like grinding metal. "She ingested an emetic and a sedative. Check her bag for the vial and call the police." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions. Elena was stabilized in a private room. The drugs flushed from her system, but the legal toxicity was just beginning. The police were waiting in the hallway. Officer Cardona, a man who looked like he had seen enough family dramas to last 10 lifetimes, was taking my statement. I didn't need to be emotional. I just needed to be efficient. I pulled up the file on my phone. While the paramedics were loading Alina, I had texted the venue manager. Because I had restored the Sterling estate, I knew exactly where the blind spots were, and I knew exactly where the 4K security camera behind the bar was angled. I had the footage in my inbox before the ambulance reached the hospital. I showed the officer the video. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. Elena looks around. She pulls the vial. She drops the poison. It was hide proof of a felony. Ethan walked out of Alina's room. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. He walked past me, past his father, who was sitting with his head in his hands, and went straight to the officer. "My mother is awake," Ethan said. His voice was clinical, detached. "She wants to make a statement. Did she confess?" the officer asked. Ethan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "No, she told me she did it to save me. She said Olivia was a gold digger who was ruining the Sterling bloodline. She said I would thank her one day." I watched Ethan. This was the moment. The cord was either going to snap or it was going to strangle us. Alina had played her final card. The mother knows best defense. She was banking on 30 years of guilt and obligation to make him drop the charges. Ethan reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out the cream-colored stationery. "The pre-written apology speech, the evidence of premeditation," Officer Ethan said, handing over the paper. "My mother didn't just try to assault my wife, she planned a character assassination. She wrote this before the reception started. This proves intent." "Ethan, don't," his father whispered from the chair. "She's your mother." Ethan turned to his father. "No," he said. "She's a criminal, and if you pay for her lawyer, you're an accomplice." He turned back to the officer. "I am pressing charges, and I am requesting an immediate restraining order for myself and my wife." I watched him sign the statement. It was the most romantic thing I had ever seen. He didn't just choose me, he amputated the limb that was killing us. He cut her off with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. There were no tears, just the sound of a pen on paper, finalizing the divorce between a son and his toxic origin. It has been 12 months since the wedding. Alina is currently serving a 24-month sentence for aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. Her lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, but the pre-written note destroyed that defense. You can't claim temporary insanity when you drafted a press release about it 3 days in advance. Ethan and I didn't move into the estate. We bought a fixer-upper on the other side of the city. It has good bones, but it needs work just like us. I'm sitting at our kitchen table working on a bowl I broke last week. It's a Japanese technique called kinugi. You don't hide the cracks. You fill them with a lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy is that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken. The break is where the strength is. For a long time, I thought a perfect marriage meant no conflict. I thought it meant smooth surfaces and easy days. But Alina taught me something valuable. She tried to shatter us. She tried to find the stress points and hammer them until we crumbled, but she miscalculated the materials. When we sat in that hospital waiting room watching the police lead her away in handcuffs, Ethan and I didn't fall apart. We fused. The trauma didn't leave a scar, it left a seam of gold. We trust each other with a depth that most couples never reach because they are never tested. I know with absolute certainty that he will choose me. And he knows that I will see the threats he is blind to. I finish the bowl. The gold lines catch the afternoon sun shining brighter than the original ceramic ever did. It is imperfect. It is jagged and it is unbreakable. If you believe that toxic family members don't deserve a seat at your table, hit that like button and share this story. And tell me in the comments, what's the pettiest thing a relative has ever done at a wedding you attended?